How do we make our Python objects printable? It seems really obvious and easy, but it turns out to be a little more subtle than many people think. And in this video, I'm going to talk about Dunder stir and Dunder repr, two different methods that try to do almost exactly the same thing, but not quite. So I'm going to say class person, def dunder init, self name, self.name equals name. There we go. I've created a simple class. It has takes one argument, name, which is then assigned to the attribute self.name. So if I say p equals person of Reuven, I say p.name, sure enough, the name was set to Reuven. What a coincidence. And then I say print p. What happens when I say print p? It prints this thing. And many people are like, wait, where is this coming from? Right? It should print something nicer than that. Well, so what happens here? When we invoke print p, basically print of p becomes print of stir of p. That's why print can actually print anything in Python, because whatever argument it gets, it turns into a string. Well, when we do that, that invokes p.dunder stir. So whenever you invoke stir on something, the stir constructor to get a string, dunder stir is run. And so basically then Python asks p, do you have a dunder stir attribute? And the answer is no. So then Python asks p's class person, do you have a dunder stir attribute? And the answer is no. So then, well, we got to go to our last resort, object. Python asks object, the top class in our hierarchy, do you have dunder stir? And the answer is yes. Sure enough, it does. And that is what runs. And indeed, if I want to, I can say object.dunder stir of p, and look what I get back. Exactly the same thing as we saw before. Now, as a default, this isn't bad. But for most people, most of the time, this is pretty ugly and useless. So what do we do to fix it? We add a dunder stir, def dunder stir self. And as long as we return a string, we return anything we want. It can include stuff from self. It can not include stuff from self. Or I can just say return, I am a person. And now, right, the class works just fine. The object works just fine. If I say print p, I get I am a person, which is not wrong, but it's not quite right either. So let's change this to be, person named. And we'll say here, put it in quotes even, self.name. And there we go. So now I run it, and there we go. Person named Reuven. All good. But then I continue working in Jupyter, and I say, hey, what is p? I just put p in here. And as you might know, when you're in Jupyter, if you give it an expression, which can be a variable or a function call, but if you give it an expression in the final line of a cell, the expression's value is returned. So we can see it right away. It's really useful for us to see values. So I say p and I get, that's not exactly the same as I got before, but it's not the same either. What's going on here? And the thing is, basically, we have encountered stir and dunder repr. And so basically, when we print something for the end user, it goes through print, which then goes through stir, as we saw. This invokes dunder stir. This we've said already. But when we display something for programmers in Jupyter or the debugger, it actually uses dunder repr to give us the printed representation of that object. Now, how are these different? You can think of dunder repr as exposing more of the internals, but it doesn't have to, right? I read recently that basically dunder stir is supposed to be printable and nice, and dunder repr is supposed to be accurate and unambiguous. That might be true. I think of it as dunder stir is for end users and dunder repr is for programmers. Again, that's not a bad thing, but now we have two issues. Number one is, how do I set this? Well, you might guess, right? I can set this by just adding another method. And so now I'm going to add this method, dunder repr. And then I can say here, I'll say stir person and dunder repr person. And now if I say print of p, I'll get the stir of person. If I say just p, I get the repr. Now they can be completely different, right? You might very well want to keep things nice and aesthetic in the case of stir, but sort of internal exposing all sorts of debugging stuff for dunder repr. There's nothing wrong with that per se. But in many, many, many cases that I've seen, there's no reason to have both, right? They're just going to give us exactly the same thing. And in such a case, you can actually get rid of Dunder stir. If you only define Dunder repr, then it takes the place of Dunder stir, if, one isn't defined. So if I now do this, and then I say print p, watch what I'm going to get. I get the Dunder repr. And if I say just p, I get the Dunder repr. So my general advice is, unless you have a really good reason, only define Dunder repr. And then if and when you want a nicer, sort of more aesthetically pleasing version for end users, then go ahead and define Dunder stir. This is not in line with the sort of official Python recommendation, so I am going a bit against the grain here, but I do think that it's a little more practical. It also means that if you ever see the printed representation show up after you define Dunder stir, you'll know why. Because you have to define Dunder repr in order for it to show up, again, in debuggers, in Jupyter, even inside of other data structures, right? So if you have a list of people, they will show up with Dunder repr rather than with Dunder stir unless you're careful. So which you define? Maybe just Dunder repr, that's my general advice, but if you want both, sure, define Dunder repr and Dunder stir. But you probably should not be defining only Dunder stir, because that's going to lead to some confusion and some ugly internals of Python being exposed to your end users. I hope this was useful and interesting. Let me know what you think. Let me know what other questions you have. I'll be delighted to answer them. Give it to me in the comments. Don't forget to, as they say, like and subscribe, and I'll be back real soon with lots more about Python and pandas and Jupyter and everything in between. Thanks again for watching.